Hello everybody. I hope everybody's doing fine today. I am going to show you how I put on binding on one of those little quilt-mojis. And I've already pre-made some bias binding. I've showed you how to cut that before. I might do another little video on that, but I need to get this bound, so I thought I would show you how I do that. Now, the first thing I do when I do my binding, I kind of do a little dry run, and I want to see where those actual seam allowances fall, so I don't have them in a tight spot or in a corner. Now, having said that, this quilt is going to get rounded corners, and I'm going to show you how I do that also. So I'm going to go around. I'm kind of do a little, I usually start on the longer side, and I just do a little dry fit, especially when you use scrap. Every time you use a scrap binding and you have smaller or shorter pieces in your binding, there's more of a possibility that it ends up in the corner. So I do a little dry fit beforehand, and it's really kind of nice to show this on this small little Quilt-moji. And now this is a little scrap I had, and I think it fits fine. It's got some of the orange in there, but what's the nice thing about these Quilt-mojis with all the different colors, you can virtually use any binding you have left over, and it's always going to look fine. So I cut my binding at 2 inches, and I'm going to leave about a hand of, I don't really measure it with a rule, about a hand width or a hand length even of tail here, a little binding tail. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is kind of stitch in place or lock my stitches in, and I'm going to just very gently, I don't want to tug on it, it's bias, I don't want to, really pull it out of shape. And I'm stitching along with a 1/4 inch, and as I'm coming closer to the corner, I'm going to stop, and I always stop with my needle down. It's really helpful, and I'm going to try to, I use usually different shapes to kind of come up with the way I want to do the curve. And each one of your Quilt-mojis can be different, but all of the curves should probably be the same on all of them. Same quilt here, okay? So you can lay this around here and you can pin it, or you can hold it, especially if the curve is not as sharp, and I can really get a nice grip on that. Okay. I'm gonna come around, so needle down, and I'll rearrange everything. If something kind of moves a little bit, that's because my tripod is right there to my left, and if I bump it, then you get that little bit of a wiggle. Okay, so I'm going to go down to the next corner, and as I get close, I have this little pin cushion, this magnetic pin cushion. I use that, and I let it bump into the edges here, and then I just use a pencil and mark that. So you can see it pretty good. Here is my round shape. And even though that here is some of the connection and the seam allowances, they're not directly in the corner, so I think they're fine. And I'm readjusting, making sure. And just keep the edge of your presser foot or your 1/4 inch foot at the edge of the raw edges of the binding towards the outside. Coming all the way. And you see, I always kind of sew in short little bursts because it gives me control over what goes on. This binding is a little bit off here, so I'm going to adjust that as I come closer. I'll show you what I'm talking about. It's not exactly placed on the one underneath, so I'm just going to move that over. You actually have a lot of control if you keep reevaluating, I guess. So here is my little pin cushion that I've decided to use on this Quilt-moji, Here we go. And sometimes I use the cap of a spray or whatever I have. And okay, so as I get closer, I'm going to form this around the curve. Okay, so if I'm about 1 inch away from the curve, that's when I'm going to start forming it. You really have to do that before and not wait till you're right on top. Okay, and once I'm around, I'm going to concentrate on the next line here. And I'm getting closer, so I want to use my little shape again, my little pincushion shape. Okay, whoops. And here we go. And I'm going to place it around again. And this time when I'm coming around, I'm going to stop very soon. Okay, so now that I'm around here, I reevaluate and see how things fit together. So I'm going to come a little bit more down the line. Okay, so I'm actually going to cut the thread on this one so I can show you how I join the binding. Okay, so now I'm going to go to the edge of that and trim that off because I don't want to work with pieces that are all over the place here. Okay, so now I'm going to make sure that it's nice and flat as it comes from the side that I was sewing on. And I'm going to open it. And I'm going to place this inside. Now I'm going to move it down, so I'm going to make myself a new, see if this goes the wrong way, I'm going to make myself a new edge. And it's going to be on the bias. And the way I do that is I just fold it down. And I just cut in the fold, okay? So, okay, again, nice and smooth. And now I'm going to use my pencil and I'm going to mark where that piece meets. So, in order for that to fit together, you're going to need your seam allowance. And your seam allowance, you have 1/4 inch from one side and 1/4 inch to the other side. So just like if you're piecing, you have to add 1/2 inch in your seam allowance. Now, we can't add anything to this piece because it's already cut. So we're going to add it to this piece, and it's real important. Maybe you can just make a line on which side you're going to add that seam allowance, because if you cut 1/2 inch from the line to the right instead of the left, then nothing's going to fit and you're going to have to piece things together again. Okay, so your seam allowance, you can mark it with a little ruler or you can cut it. I'm going to just cut this one because I kind of know what 1/2 inch looks like. And in this video, there's only so much room for things. Okay, so now I'm going to move this binding together, and I'm actually having it offset a little bit here by about 1/4 inch and stitch to get started. And then I'm going to line this up and stitch to the other side. And now the binding isn't, the binding isn't as straight as I would like. It's kind of hard to work in this small space, but I'm going to open it and fold it. And because this is bias, you have a little bit of a give. So even if it's not down to the millimeter here, it's going to be just fine. So I'm just going to make sure that I have binding underneath and on top, because this one is sort of finger pressed in place and it works. So I'm going to start where I stopped. You can use pins if you like, but I'm just going to hold it. So now I've kind of spread out those two pieces that have the little bit of a seam allowance. Okay. Once everything is done and I'm happy with how it's laying down, that's when I'm going to start cutting the corners. And you can just trim them right along the edge of the binding. Let me just move this and hold this so you can see it. And so it's important not to cut it too close to your stitching line. You really need that 1/4 inch because that is where your binding will fold over to the other side. Okay, and it looks like this. So this is the Kiss Quilt-moji, and it is my little Valentine's thing. I just wanted to show it to you. I hope you like it, and please let me know if you have any questions. Annette Ornelas here from SouthwindQuilts.com, and I will see you later. Bye.